Bumps in the road. In some parts of the country, they're quite common. Road ripples, potholes, and chuck holes. We tend to not pay much attention to them in our cars, unless one happens to flatten a tire or dent a rim. But in the air, they get our undivided attention. Passengers hate them. And most pilots are not terribly fond of them either. Well, the best way to understand turbulence is to learn more about it. So let's talk turbulence, those truculent bumps in the air. There's often confusion about the intensity of turbulence and how to report it. And the fact is, most pilots report turbulence as being far more serious than it really is. Your light might be my severe. So let's consult the FAA for some definitions. Light turbulence is defined as that which causes a momentary change in altitude and/or attitude. If you feel a slight strain against your seatbelt and shoulder harness, you've got light turbulence. And by the way, you've probably heard pilots talk about light chop. Well, it does not describe a Weight Watchers meal. It refers to continuous or rhythmic bumpiness in the air. Now, moderate turbulence has greater intensity, as you might expect, than its lighter brother. You'll experience changes in altitude and/or attitude, but you can maintain control of the airplane at all times. In moderate turbulence, you definitely will feel the pull of your seatbelt and shoulder harness. And in addition, objects that are unsecured may be dislodged, fall off a seat, something like that. Now, severe turbulence is where it starts to get really interesting. Severe turbulence causes large and abrupt changes in altitude and/or attitude, along with large variations in airspeed. You might even lose control of the airplane momentarily. If you experience severe turbulence, you'll be forced violently against your seatbelt and shoulder restraint. Heck, you might even bang your head on the headliner. This might also be a good time to duck, because unsecured objects will be tossed about the cabin. I don't know about you, but getting whacked in the noggin by a heavy-duty flashlight is not my idea of a good time. For most of us, our first encounter with turbulence seems severe enough, no matter the real intensity level. Finally, there is extreme turbulence, in which the aircraft is tossed about and is practically impossible to control. It may cause structural damage. This is the kind of turbulence that you can expect inside a thunderstorm. Now, earlier we discussed the turbulence associated with thunderstorms, wind shear, and microbursts, but there are a couple of other sources. You can also find turbulence in hot air in the vicinity of mountains and near the jet stream. First, let's get hot. The turbulence you get on a warm, sunny day in the middle of an air mass is called convective turbulence. It's caused by hot air doing what hot air does, rising. It all starts when the sun heats the ground, and then the ground heats the air above it, and we all know that hot air rises. What happens then on hot days? You get vertical movement of the air, both up and down. In fact, you can count on getting the same amount of air going up as down. Very often, the updrafts carry moisture with them, and as it climbs higher, the moisture cools, forming billowy cumulus-type clouds. Below these clouds, you'll get bounced around. Feels like your teeth are going to be bounced out. But if you can climb above them, you'll often find smooth sailing. Now, another place you'll find turbulence is in the mountains. You can always count on an updraft on the upwind side of a mountain and a downdraft on the downwind side. If the wind is particularly strong and the air mass is stable, you should expect a mountain wave. A mountain wave occurs when the wind gets lifted over a range of mountains and goes back down again on the other side. What can happen then is the wind keeps going up and down on the lee side of the range, creating undulating waves several hundred miles downwind of the mountains. Now, the air in the wave itself can actually be pretty smooth. In fact, glider pilots use the updrafts in the wave to soar to record altitudes. But underneath the crest of each wave is a horizontal rotor cloud in which the turbulence can be severe or extreme. Now, mountain waves are very often marked by lenticular clouds, lens-shaped flat clouds that form in layers over the top of the mountains and frequently also at the crest of each wave downwind. If you're flying in mountainous terrain, it's particularly important to get as much information as you can during your pre-flight regarding clouds, winds, the stability of the air mass, and the presence of mountain wave conditions. Don't just rely on the surface winds. They can be calm, particularly in a valley, while the winds aloft are raging. Now, when you get that pre-flight briefing, if the winds near the mountaintops are in excess of 25 knots, you've got a very strong likelihood of at least moderate turbulence. If the winds are in excess of 50 knots across the top of the mountain ridges, then you can expect severe turbulence. You'll learn how and where to get wind information later on. As far as your flight planning is concerned, if you're planning a trip through the mountains and the winds aloft are strong, pick a different route. If you do plan to approach mountain ridges from leeward, from downwind with a strong wind blowing, the FAA suggests that you climb to 2,000 or 3,000 feet above the ridges before you try and cross them. That should give you enough clearance to keep from getting caught in a downdraft condition. Besides climbing higher, there's another precaution you can take to give yourself an out, a little safety valve. Rather than approaching a ridge at a 90-degree angle, approach it instead at a 45-degree angle. That way you'll have the ability to turn away from the ridge without having to execute a full 180-degree turn. Maybe only a 45-degree turn or a 90-degree turn will get you out of trouble. One other tip, if you're going to fly parallel to a ridge, plan to fly on the upwind side of the ridge rather than the downwind side. That way you'll be flying in updrafts and your airplane will perform a lot better. Now, the last bit of turbulence you need to know about as a pilot is clear air turbulence. Clear air turbulence is defined as turbulence above 15,000 feet that is not associated with convective activity, not associated with thunderstorms. What it is most often associated with is the jet stream, that narrow, shallow, meandering river of strong winds up at the tropopause. As you remember, the tropopause is the boundary between the troposphere and the stratosphere. Now, the Weather Service issues forecasts for clear air turbulence associated with the jet stream. But the only way to find out if the turbulence is really there is by listening for pilot reports on the frequency or asking the flight service station for any pilot reports along your route. So what do you do about turbulence? The key is to use your knowledge to avoid it when you can, especially in the mountains. But if you do encounter severe turbulence, slow to at or below the maneuvering speed, 99 knots in your Skyhawk, and take steps to get out of it. So now you know where to expect and how best to avoid those bumps and potholes in the air. If only we could figure out a way to get an asphalt crew up there to patch them.